look at what the mood is like, what people who are insiders, who are actually on campaigns right now, would be talking about and thinking about and seeing inside campaign headquarters.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is the battlefield.
What are the things that you're paying attention to that you think happened in the past week that really matter in terms of shaping the midterms?
The first thing I'm looking at is Georgia. You got Mike Collins. He won the Republican primary. He's going to give the Democrats the candidate they want. Definitely makes the Democrats easier to hold on to that Senate seat. But what I'm looking at is the Republican who won for governor. Will Collins start to pull him down?
Are Republicans really worried about that? Georgia has traditionally been pretty strong Republican territory.
We've slowly watched Georgia go from ruby red to much more of a purple. And the implications of this have to do with who's going to win governor, what does that look like for redistricting, and how does it set the stage for what's going to happen in 2028?
Georgia, a bunch of dominoes there.
Exactly. If Georgia stays purple, this becomes a real struggle and changes the battleground for Republicans on how we can win the presidency in 2028.
What I would see from my side of the aisle is this is going to be an acid test for Jon Ossoff.
The other thing I'm looking at is there's a super PAC out there that is spending in 4 congressional districts across the country. Now, super PAC spending is not a story. It really isn't. But what's interesting about this is we're testing some affordability messages. It's Virginia, it's Florida, and it's out west. And so it's a nice slice. These are going to run for a couple of weeks, and it's going to tell us a lot about how we're going to try to message in the rest of this midterm.
I agree with you. That's a really interesting one. You're no dummies inside Republican HQ, right? You see that this is the number one issue for voters. Democrats have jumped out to a 13-point approval edge on whatever issue voters identify as their top issue. They're saying by 13-point margin, and that tells you something because affordability is voters' number one issue, and they tend to prefer Democrats. Let me ask you this. When you test an affordability message like that in swing districts, that's a persuasion message, right? That's not a base mobilization message.
Every Republican who's sitting here looking at this map knows that we have a problem with affordability. It's why we got the Iran surrender. Trump all but said it was, I don't want to become Herbert Hoover, is because we know the economy is teetering. We know people are struggling. If we just go out on our record, we're going to lose. And so now we're going to try to push a different persuasion message that helps in the midterms.
We were talking before we went on air here about the kinds of ads you're seeing being run in Georgia in the gubernatorial race, and you're saying they are all Trump all the time. That feels like a base mobilization message versus what's being tested by the super PAC in those House districts, which is a persuasion message.
Look, our base is depressed. They're not necessarily going to show up with the same energy that the Democrats are. The Republican base feels deflated. They feel like things are just falling apart. And so we need those swing voters to come back to us that gave us the job in the first place. Other thing that I'm watching that I think is really interesting is there's some projections on how much money we're going to end up spending in Texas, Ohio, and Maine. Now, the fact that we're spending a lot of money isn't that surprising. What is surprising is the fact that in Maine, for example, it looks like we're going to double, maybe even close to triple the amount of money that's going to be spent this cycle trying to protect Susan Collins than what happened 6 years ago. And if you really want to know what Republicans care about, you got to follow the money, and that tells you the real story.
But is that a bit of a dog bites man story? As you said, we know that we're awash in money, and I've seen projections of how much money MAGA Incorporated, the Trump PAC, has at its disposal. It's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars more. So it would seem like all that money's going to go to some of these Senate races, right?
The big fear in our circles, because what we know is that MAGA Inc. money is going to hold it for lawyers and impeachment when we lose the House and Senate. We're not sure that money's going towards any Republicans right now.
So other political consultants like you're not banking on getting any help from Trump.
No, I think MAGA Inc. is hoarding its money. They keep saying they're going to spend the money, but when we're looking at how we're fighting on these seats, we're looking at this battleground, we are not counting on them to do anything.
It wouldn't be the first time that he hoarded money for his own purposes that was ostensibly to help the team. Should we take a look at how all of this stacks up into this week's dashboard?
Yes, let's take a look.
All right, let's pull it up. And this is something that you can see in detail on worthknowing.substack.com. First, I want to take a look at the biggest structural indicators. These are the things that insiders, analysts look at as the biggest tells of what's going to happen in the election. And there are two that you can look at in just about every election: presidential approval rating and consumer sentiment. And both of those, you can see by the upward inclined blue arrow, are tilting toward Democrats over the past week, with Trump's net presidential approval rating going down by almost a point, and the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which is the most widely watched and trusted measure of how consumers are feeling about the economy, sitting at its third record low month in a row, also tilting toward the Democrats. The one indicator that's not necessarily as rosy over the past week for Democrats is the generic ballot. That's super important in midterm elections. It just gives a measure of how voters in general are feeling about the parties and who they would like to represent them in Congress. You're seeing a little slippage according to one measure, the Real Clear Politics polling average.
What's interesting, gas prices have dropped. Why do you think there's no real change in some of those numbers, or especially the Trump approval numbers?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So I get into this a little bit in the accompanying article with this, but it is true. Since the announcement 6 days ago of the peace deal, we have seen a decline of 13 cents on average, according to AAA, in nationwide gas prices at the pump. But there's going to be a little bit of a lag if there's going to be any effect in presidential approval. You can see that in the polls that are being aggregated into these polling averages. And most of them were conducted either while this announcement was rolling out or beforehand. So it'll take probably another week or two before we start to see a lagging effect, if there is one. Remember, this is just one component of the overall price environment that's really weighing down Trump's approval.
Here's the other question that really kind of strikes me on this. Let's say there is a little bit of a change. How do you see that impacting the trajectory of where Democrats are going to go?
I don't see a major change. We know that gas prices are the most visible component of voters' perception of how affordable life is, about what prices are doing. But remember that there's a time bomb that we've covered on this show before. All of these inputs that end up in our food prices, in our grocery aisle, all of those inputs have also gone up in price. Fertilizer, sulfur, urea, the kinds of things that are getting bottlenecked in the Strait of Hormuz. Even if that bottleneck opens up, we still saw all of those elevated fertilizer prices baking into the prices that farmers were paying during the spring planting when the war was active. And so that's still going to go off later in the fall. I would expect that consumers are still going to feel a major pinch, even if there's some relief on gas prices. I'm not expecting there to be a huge bump in presidential approval, and I'm not expecting Democrats to do a heck of a lot different.
So I guess bottom line,
even though there's been a little bit of a shift, and you can see some of the ratings that I've reflected, we've baked in now some of the shifts in House districts as they've gone through this gerrymandering redistricting. So there are 5 more seats that are now tilting toward Republicans than there were at the start of the year. I still think overall the week is a draw or tilts slightly toward the Democrats, because there was one major poll coming out of Ohio showing the Democratic nominee, former Senator Sherrod Brown, ahead by 8 points. Now, that's a poll from Fox News. We don't like the news in the Democratic Party that you get out of Fox News. We don't even think it is news, but the polling is surprisingly high rated and accurate. And the noted elections analyst, Charlie Cook, said that he's seeing the exact same thing in the internal polling that both campaigns are sharing with him. So if Ohio is now leaning this strongly toward the Democrats, that shifts the entire Senate map. That is a BFD. And that's why I would hand this week slightly toward the Democrats. Do you agree?
100% agree. I think we're seeing the same thing and where Republican spending is going. I think that's why Trump had to make this deal with Iran, because the economy was going to continue to tank, and his projections of what was his world was going to look like once the Democrats took over on January 3rd was going to be ugly for him. And so I still maintain that I think Democrats are on a path to not only win the House, but probably win the Senate. I think if you're a Democrat right now, you should be feeling pretty good.